Good evening, everyone. Alex Selfand here for the Salty Dogs, another educational webinar. And tonight we're talking about a slightly different topic. It's actually very relevant to any of you trying to find potentially finding boat insurance or if you're chartering. And that all has to do with your sailing resume, which is probably when you're maybe the furthest thing from your mind or not, depending upon where you are in your career. And with us tonight is Jason Burns from CharterRode and an associate of his, Adam Meyer. And I'm going to stop the talking and turn it over to Jason and let him explain why we're here and what this is all about. It's all yours.
Great. Thanks, Alex. While everyone's kind of getting settled in, we can quickly take a look at the agenda for tonight. We'll do some basic introductions, give a little better idea about myself and Adam. We'll talk about how your sailing resume is used for insurance purposes by brokers, carriers, and underwriters. And then we'll get to the ugliest sailing resume challenge, which you may or may not have heard of. And then we'll wrap up with the Q&A. If you have a question that you'd like us to ask or cover during the main discussion, just put it in the chat. I'm going to keep the chat window open, and I'll keep an eye on that, and we can bring it into the discussion from there as well. And there's Alex putting your questions in the chat. So yeah, if there's specific questions you have, just put them in the chat. If it's relating to the discussion that we're having, we'll go ahead and talk about that. Otherwise, we'll hold it for the end. I think that's it. So let me put this window over here. So we'll get into the intros. My name is Jason Burns. I'm the founder and president at CharterRode. I'm focused on building what we call the sailing resume blockchain, which is maritime sailing resume system that's backed by blockchain technology. Started the company a couple of years ago with the idea it should be easy to create a sailing resume that can be shared, verified, and trusted by everyone. And let's bring Adam into the conversation. Adam, you want to give a brief introduction about yourself?
I'm Adam. I'm from North Carolina. I've been doing boat insurance since about 1996. In sales only since 2000, boats of all sizes, stripes, colors, charter, pleasure, commercial, no size limitations, no value limitations. It's just kind of what I do. Don't know why I chose to do that, but here I am, and I love going to work every day. So we keep on rolling.
All right. Thanks, Adam. And thanks for being here and taking the time with us. I know you've got an event to get to that sounds exciting later as well. So the topic of today is a little bit different maybe than what was advertised. We're talking about how insurance brokers, carriers, and underwriters use your resume. Again, it's all about evaluating risk. So I think it might make sense just to start our conversation with a quick level set on what a sailing resume is. I've seen quite a few different versions. I know Adam's seen a million different ones. To me, it's really a document that provides an overview of your seaworthiness, really so that others can judge how risky or depending on how adventurous you are, if you're adventurous on the water, right? So it's all about risk to me. For those in our audience that are getting ready to embark, you can also use it to settle the bar bet. Alex and I were talking about that earlier. Who has to pick up the painkiller tab in a few weeks? But really, I think the primary reason, in my experience, and why I started the company to have a sailing resume is to share the specifics of your experience that someone doesn't know you or doesn't trust you just by having a conversation with you, so that you know what you're doing out there. Adam, what do you think?
I think, especially in today's market, and a lot of people have to take a moment and reflect on how long they've been involved with marine insurance. And for anybody listening other than me, I'm sure it's from a consumer's point of view. If you've been in the game a while, that is, you've had insurance for a while on various boats, and you've had some recent experience in the past year or two, then you're going to be a little more familiar with what I'm about to say. But if you haven't been in the insurance market for a while and you jump back into the deep end now with a new vessel or a used vessel that you want to buy and insure, you're in for a rude awakening. It is a vastly different landscape than it was even 3 years ago. But I've seen it cycle up and down. In insurance, we go through what's called a hard market or a soft market. And in a soft market, insurance is pretty easy to get and rates are lower and everything just is better for the consumer. When the market hardens, not only do rates escalate, but the entry guidelines get tougher. And so this is what CharterRode, I think, is speaking to, in that underwriters are paying more and more attention now to not just the list of boats that you say you've owned. I've owned X, Y, and Z. They want to know what year that vessel was. They want to know how long you owned it. Now they want to know, where did you navigate that vessel? As you move into larger vessels or higher vessel values, that resume becomes hugely important, particularly if a person is making a jump in size and ownership, from say a 30-footer to a 44-footer, which in the past usually wouldn't have been a problem. 15 feet was about the trigger before they started asking you more questions. Now it's 10 feet or less, and they're going to dig deep into your background and your prior ownership, not to mention loss history. So I think an updated resume, particularly one that virtually updates itself, is hugely valuable. Not only for my customers buying boats, making a jump in size. Let's say they want to own or operate a vessel, and heretofore they've had a 44-footer, but they've had it for 15 years. And now they want to move into a 60-footer and cruise, do some distance cruising. They're going to get a lot of questions about prior ownership, prior operation. They want to see a resume. They're going to ask you, what have you owned? What have you operated? And where? And what was it and why? If all of this information was easily at hand, the underwriters, I think, would jump for joy. Those that I polled and asked about these resumes said, yes, bring it on. They would love to trust that system because it's kind of operator input error free for the large part. And I think it's going to be valuable. Don't bypass having a deep resume. Keep it up to date. And this service provides that. I think it's awesome.
Let's dig into some real life situations. So again, you're the expert here, but I've talked to quite a few underwriters in the last 6 to 8 months, and there seems to come to these continual situations that come up. So I'll start with the first one. Maybe a little background for people that are just starting out as crew on this upcoming rally to the Caribbean. I think they're leaving the next week or so. You get the bug, and you're like, man, this is awesome. I'm going to go buy my first boat, right? So this is the first time boat owner. Is there, it sounds like the answer is yes, right? It's kind of a leading question here, but specific to the first time boat owner, what kind of value is placed on having an experience? Of course, the carrier, you're going to ask for all of it on their forms because they have to sign their life away that they attest to the experience, but having a sailing resume in addition to that can be submitted as supplemental information, how important is that for the first time boat owner?
Absolutely crucial. Absolutely the most crucial part of that equation is a resume. Because if you haven't owned a boat before, I can get you into a 24-foot Grady White without a problem. That's not difficult. 18-foot Hobie Cats, 23 San Juans, so something small like that. All we really need to say is Jason's attended sailing camp for 9 years and passed his test, or Jason's taken ASA 101. We want to get him in the small boat and get him started. That's not really problematic. It's when you start looking at higher value, higher length of boats. Let's say you haven't owned a boat, you've crewed, you've raced, but now you want to get a 33-footer and really start rolling with it. But you don't want to take that stepping stone of having to suffer a 26-footer for 3 years before you qualify into that 33-footer. So regardless of new or old of the vessel, let's presume it's newer, let's presume it's within 10 years, whatever. So the boat's not the issue. Now the issue becomes the buyer. How do we get them into that boat? I can put it in an application in the 3 or so lines that are allocated to me online when I submit you. And maybe the underwriter will say, that's enough. but chances are not. Most online systems, and I do about 50% rating online, 50% submission to underwriters. It kind of depends on the vessel. But if you have the opportunity to do an online submission, you're not going to be able to really convey your history, your passion, your relevant coursework that you may have had, the fact that you've had a pilot's license for 20 years, the fact that you flew the military for 20 years. I had a guy today that flew an F-18 for 20 years, but he's making a decent jump in size. Well, that flying experience is relevant. If he had the benefit of an extended sailing resume, we might not have to draw that in. So I'm going to take the guy that doesn't necessarily fit the box for online rating, or gal, and I'm going to put them in an application, and I'm going to include some backstory. So now here I'm the agent. I'm selling you as the customer to the underwriter. I'm not trying to sell you a quote yet because I don't have one yet. So I'm trying to get one. So Adam tends to put a pretty heavy backstory in with risks that need a little extra push across the finish line. Nowadays, instead of a deep backstory, I'm getting resumes from clients. I'm asking for them. I'm sending them a generic resume form that we have drafted for, all boats. And it's very basic. It's really just the basics. If I had a product that was verified and vetted that I could send to an underwriter and say, okay, here's his history, but hey, check out his resume. And they get that link and they can open it and they can see in real time the most updated information, and they know not only what you've sailed, but how far, how long, and when. Because if it was 20 years ago, that's relevant. If it was last year, that's more relevant to the underwriter because it's current history. So we get captains that we submit for our risks that are going to run a boat, for example, and I might not have an updated resume. It might be a year or two old. We all know that she's got the qualifications as a captain to run this mega yacht, but the underwriters always come back and say, well, what has she been doing the past 2 years? The resume ends in 2021.
Right.
So they want to know current data. And this has really become important in the past 3 years since COVID hit. The market hardened and the restrictions to get into a program have gotten tougher. We're going deeper with resumes now than ever before.
I was talking, I can't remember who it was. I don't think it was you, but I'm sure you got a story similar to this, where they get a call from an owner that just took delivery of their new 45-foot catamaran in South Africa, and they're getting ready to disembark for the transatlantic journey, saying, hey, can you insure me? Right? No prior planning, probably the first boat that they've bought, and they're just dumbfounded that it's not like car insurance. They can't just go get insurance.
That's right. That's right. And people really don't find that out until they get up with me and see that I ask all kinds of crazy questions that their homeowner would never ask them about boats. And they ask me, why do you ask me so many questions? And the answer to that is because I'm not going to just one market. If I'm your homeowner agent, I'm probably going to quote you with State Farm and tick all the boxes, and there you go. And that works great for boats that fit that program. But when you come to me with something a little bit exotic, you're making a jump in size, first time boat, international navigation, you want to be in Florida or the Bahamas during the summer, we're going to go really deep. And that takes time. And I'm not trying to say that it's a lengthy process, because it really shouldn't be, but it's not an overnight process. I had two that came in today. Oh, we're closing on Friday. Both of them over $500,000. Now, both of them eminently doable, but in that limited time frame, I can only get 1 or 2 quotes for each client, when if I'm given 3 or 4 or 5 days, I might have 8 quotes in hand. So I'm going to go to those,
right, or a month, right?
I mean, it can take a week or more, and you start getting deep with international or mega yacht or heavy distance cruising. These underwriters have to be coaxed into comfort with you. So we'll negotiate 2 or 3 times before a final quote is provided, that I can then share with the client and say, not only is this quote strong, it's good for your risk, but it's vetted, it's viable, and we could bind on it, provided you provide me A, B, and C. I need an application. I need a storm plan. Oh, and I'm going to need a resume.
Right.
Well, it would be great if that was kind of already there.
Yeah. So that sounds like that, especially for the first time boat owner, they just need to plan, right?
Yes.
Like any kind of prudent
Please be
sailor
prepared.
preparing a long offshore journey, you need to plan ahead and make sure you understand that it's not like car insurance unless you're getting a boat for the lake house. You plan to do any kind of distance on any size vessel that's larger than 30 feet.
Well, and if you want
Have to
some
plan for it, right?
coverage, I'm not saying coverage can't be obtained on the quick. You can get that through some of the larger names that I'm sure everybody's familiar with. Those guys won't do crazy things like international travel. A lot of them won't do catamarans. A lot of them won't touch a sailing cat. It just kind of depends. So
Or boats with lithium batteries is another
well,
new, right?
we haven't seen that yet, but that is being discussed. And ironically, next week is our big national seminar that we host in Florida. And everybody who's anybody in my niche will be there. And that is going to be the hot topic this year.
Yeah.
How are we dealing with lithium batteries? It hasn't been dealt with yet, but I think it's going to.
What about renewal? So a lot of people here are going to be up for renewal. I think when you're in the club, you got your boat insured, but now you're up for renewal. How important is the sailing resume for that? Oh, and we lost Adam.
No, hang on, I'm coming back. Have you got me on voice?
Yeah, I got you on voice. So we're talking about
Okay.
renewals,
Here
right?
comes the video. Sorry.
Once
I'm
you
not
get,
the most
I don't know if that was you or me freezing, glitching. Once you get in the club, right, the insured club, and then you're just like, nothing's really changed, right? I'm just getting my renewal. I'm not talking about changing my cruising grounds or my coverage areas or anything. How important is the sailing resume in that situation, or is it really not that relevant?
I think it still comes in handy to keep it updated, because inevitably, once I find the right product and price for you, and we get it set and everything's hunky-dory for the first year, and here comes renewal, and you might see a standard cost of living increase 3% to 5% on your insurance premium. You call me and say, is it worth it? Yeah, man, we don't shop unless it's way over 5% of an increase, especially in this volatile market. But now we go 2 years, and now we're 3 years down the road, and your carrier comes in and says, "Oh, Jason, your premium's going up 20%," and it's not anything you did. It's just maybe they took some bad losses the year before. Maybe the whole market's taken a general increase. Who knows? But all of a sudden, you get whacked, and I call you and say, "Hey, Jason, I just got your renewal, and it's up 20%. We got a shop coverage." Your survey is still valid for sometimes up to being 3 years, usually only 2. But if you've been loss free on the same vessel, most carriers will take a good survey up to 3 years of age. So your survey is still valid. So now we're going to go back to market to shop your same risk. We're going to match coverages. We're going to go back to a bunch of carriers and say, okay, here's Jason again. We'd like a new quote. And they might say, well, we'd like to see his updated resume.
Right.
So 3 years ago, when you bought the boat, you were still kind of green. Resume wasn't so deep. Well, now you're 3 years in it. You've been looping. I mean, whatever you've been doing with that boat, and you've got thousands of miles added. Isn't it great when the carrier that looked at you 3 years ago and said, well, here's our quote, and we didn't get them. 3 years from now, they look at it and go, wow, he's got so many more miles on it. Let's give him a little crediting on his rate. So I think that can come in handy as you shop your business. Clearly, when you change boats and you go to buy a new one, that resume is just as relevant at that time.
In some of my conversations directly with underwriters, they talk about how the shift from just general boat ownership to actual, it's great that you own a boat, but it doesn't mean you actually operated it. You could have just sat on stock for a year, right? So I think they're getting a little more sophisticated in their ask of, okay, great, you have a boat, but did you actually use it? Because, you know, I look at the marina where I sail here outside of Austin, Texas, and most of the boats never leave the marina, right?
Unfortunately,
that's true. Are you seeing a little more of that too, where they're asking, well, it's great that they have boat ownership, but did they actually use it in the last year?
Yes, and particularly when a client is looking to cruise. So if I insured Jane on her 38 footer a couple of years ago, and she was here in North Carolina and said, Adam, I'm only going to do local cruising. So we found her a policy with Virginia to Georgia territory. No, nothing north of Virginia, nothing south of Georgia-Florida border. So that's a localized territory. It carries a lower rate. Now Jane comes back to me and says, hey, I'm ready to take my 38 footer to the Keys and on to the Bahamas. And I'm thinking about doing some lower Caribbean. You know, what can we do? So now her risk has changed. It's the same boat, it's the same client, but now she's asking of the carrier wider navigation territory. I want to stretch my legs and cruise. And particularly if you want to go past Bahamas into the lower Caribbean, domestic insurance carriers, not all of them can do that. So you have to make sure that your carrier can accommodate that, number one.
Right.
If they can, then the next step, the underwriter is going to say, okay, great, Jane. You've been our loss-free insured for 3 years, and you're now asking for Bahamas. Tell me what you've done in the past 3 years. We want to see that you've gotten some legs under you to make that trip. So in that instance, here's that resume, very important. I'll give you a power boat, for example, very similar to that. We have a lot of clients calling and asking for loop navigation. They want to do the tour, circle loop, all that's great. Most all carriers will accommodate that. It's a special territory. They don't let you out of the Gulf in Alabama or Mississippi, wherever you come out, the 10-tom, and they don't let you south of the Georgia-Florida border during the summertime, but you can loop north of that. And then outside of storm season, you're allowed into the Gulf, Florida, and Bahamas to complete your loop. Well, we have one carrier that loves to do loop navigation, but they will not allow an insured the loop territory until they have shown with that particular carrier 2 years loss-free experience.
Oh, interesting.
So that it was interesting that carrier says, hey, we love you, you're good on the East Coast, but you got to wait a couple of years before we're going to let you do the loop tour. Now, if I had a resume that showed thousands upon thousands of miles sailed hither and yon, I might be able to circumvent that 2-year restriction.
Right, that makes sense. So kind of piggybacking there and changing your cruising grounds, right?
Right. You're asking for more, so they're going to ask for more.
Right. What if you're taking on crew, right? Does that make any difference if you're like, hey, I'm part of the Salty Dog Association, we're doing a rally, I'm going to have crew for this, it's not just me, spouse, right? Does that impact your ability to get the change of grounds?
Yes, and particularly races that include overnight. That's where they're going to be talking about minimum number of souls aboard, able-bodied souls aboard to assist with navigation. We have clients that do distance trips on big boats, for example. Let's say you're going to go from California coast to Hawaii. And you've got the legs for this. We've taken your sailing resume. We've gotten you approved and your spouse for this trip. And your carrier says, sure, no problem. We're going to give you a trip endorsement to Hawaii and let you cruise the Hawaiian Islands for X many months or the next year, or however long you're going to do it. But they're going to come back and say, all right, we're going to require at least 2 other souls aboard in addition to you and your spouse for the delivery itself. Once you get to Hawaii, the 2 of you can enjoy your boat, no problem.
Right. Yeah.
Within the bounds. And they usually say the near coastwise waters of the Hawaiian Islands not to exceed 50 miles offshore or something like that.
Do those crew have to have specific qualifications?
Well, that's
you have to submit. Is that part of your warranty?
Kind of. And it can be. I'm not going to say that every time I have an underwriter say, I want to know who the crew are. But for a long distance trip like Hawaii, like French Polynesia, You want to go to the middle of the Atlantic, for example. You want to cross the Atlantic. You're talking multi-night, multi-watch systems on board these boats. They do have the right to say, hey, who you taking with you?
Right.
And it's great when I can say, well, it's going to be Jason Burns and Adam Meyer who are accompanying this client, and here are their resumes, because I will be asked for a resume for the additional crew. Now, we're not confusing crew here with paid crew, although I could see where that line could be crossed. If you're going to make a transat voyage and you need to take 2 or 3 other souls with you, well, you're probably going to end up having to pay them to get the quality guys or gals to make that trip, unless your brother-in-law just also happens to be a really well-versed sailor. So
Or you
now
have
the
a great
crew,
group like the Salty Dogs, right? that have
or call on your
crew
salty
finders, right?
dogs
Yeah.
and say, hey, who wants to go? Now, if you pay these crew members for their service, then that can cross into, or at least in the United States, Jones Act crew coverage, where you as the master or owner of the vessel are responsible for your paid crew if they're injured during the service to the vessel. But that's not what
That's a
we're
whole
talking
other
about.
conversation for another webinar,
But it's
right?
vital for
Hired
boaters to know, if you hire crew, you need to talk to your agent about covering them for injury, because you are responsible. But to your point, Jason, I'm going to ask those crew members for resumes so that I can send them to the underwriter and say, these are the 2 or 3 guys and gals that are going with Jason to French Polynesia.
So it's a good opportunity to take a question from the audience here. Does it help being a member of the Salty Dogs?
As far as crediting for insurance, is that the question?
Yeah, I think in the context of renewals or just getting insurance, getting a best
Right.
rate, does being a member really help you get better insurance?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say so. But let's not rain on anybody's parade. Let's broaden that a little bit, because I think through your Salty Dogs connection, you can deepen your own personal resume as far as safety coursework goes. So while travelers or AIG or Chubb, for example, might not give a credit for being a Salty Dogs member, they will give a credit for having Power Squadron training, Coast Guard or Coast Guard auxiliary training, ASA coursework. That all garners a credit on the insurance. And yes, it does go towards selling you the client to the underwriter. Now, if we had a carrier, and we have a couple that'll do special crediting programs for certain subsets of vessels, for example, Sabre trawlers, I know, has a credit with one carrier, and it's just some deal that they've worked out. It's a special program for Sabre owners, which the carrier undertook because they know that particular build of vessel is super strong, super bulletproof. They may insure Sabre as a builder, who knows? So they're going to give those Sabre owners a little discount. Some of the larger trawler groups, I think I've heard of getting a little extra credit with a carrier when quoting.
I'd also think, like, going back to the Salty Dogs, right? One of the core reasons why the organization exists is to help others get out and mentor, right? So being able to participate in a rally, imagine talking to my agent, if you're my agent, hey, I'm gonna go do a solo trip down the East Coast to Bahamas and down to the Caribbean over the next few weeks, is a lot different than saying, hey, I'm joining the Salty Dog rally. There's 100 vessels all leaving together. We've got, people ashore is giving us support and weather, right? It's a more professionally run organization,
right?
Being able to experience that and gain your sea miles and the safety of that versus being out on your own is, again, one of those stepping stones, right? Through your career.
Right.
So imagine that would help, right? In getting some sort of endorsement saying I'm not just sailing alone, or even if I have crew, but because I'm also joining this rally, that I would imagine that would be important information to get that endorsement, the trip endorsement for the trip.
Yeah, they're going to ask in the resume request anything relevant to what you're asking of them. So if you say, I want to do a Bermuda rally, they're going to say, first off, have you ever been to Bermuda? Have you ever sailed to Bermuda? No, I haven't. However, I have done 3 trips to the Caribbean, St. Martin, St. Bart's, and St. Lucia. So here's my blockchain resume that shows that data. And they say, all right, well, they may not have sailed the waters to Bermuda, but Bermuda, after all, is just a rock in the middle of the ocean. So they're really unlikely to hit anything on the way, not any real tricky nav other than don't miss Bermuda. But if I can pull up that resume and show them, okay, no, I haven't done that trip, but I've done these trips, and look at the miles and the destinations that we did, that's going to be huge when you ask for that first time ever Bermuda endorsement.
Right. So let's kind of get back to some more of the situations. So we talked a little bit about this, upgrading your boat, right? So let's give a more specific situation. I've got a 35-foot monohull I've had for a few years. I've got some experience on it. Now I want to go to a 50-foot monohull and again, kind of stretch my legs a little bit. How much experience do you really need aboard that 35-foot to make your have better options for insurance when you jump to that 50-foot, right?
Well, number one, at least 3 years. Being loss-free certainly helps. If you've had a loss in the past 3 to 5 years, that has to be noted on the application. And like any risk, when they look at you, they're going to say, have you had any prior losses? Yes, I did. They want to know what it was. If it was a lightning strike, well, that's not your fault. Right. So that's an NAF, or not at fault loss. But if it was a $50,000 payout, you're going to see a little ding from that. It just is what it is. Making that 35 to 50 jump, that's 15 feet. Again, we're going to look at how long have you had your 35? Where did you go? Have you had any losses? What's your other relevant experience? Well, I've sailed with the Salty Dogs on these rallies as crew on these boats, and we went from here to there in this many miles. All of that factors in. If you can't show that, if you just say, look, I've been racing locally on my 35, I'm ready to move into a 50, I'm going to have two, maybe 3 options. And one of them you're not going to like. It's going to be London, and it's going to be expensive. And it, quite frankly, is just not that good a coverage compared to the domestic carriers. So I'm going to wish that I could keep you with the carrier that you're on the 35, but they say, no, we won't accommodate that jump. He hasn't had the 35 long enough. We need a stepping stone in the middle, something like that. So I've got 2 of my 12 carriers that will entertain what we call captain training risks.
That is, Jason's
making a jump from a 35 to a 50, and they say, all right, no problem. We're going to quote you. We're going to put a 2% minimum hull deductible on because of the jump in size. We're going to make you put a little more skin in the game. But we're going to put on what's called a no solo operation warranty. And what that warranty says is Jason's not allowed to navigate the vessel without the named training captain aboard until such time as that captain signs off on Jason's training, and we, the underwriters, review the sign off and remove the no solo warranty. So there's your intro. You've got to suffer some time with a training captain. That captain has to be approved by the underwriter via resume and captain's license. And let's say Adam is Jason's training captain. We're going to go 30 hours together. We're going to do 40 hours together. And at the end of that time, if I feel that you're ready, I'm going to use a sign-off form it's a generic form, but it has some specific questions and some ratings in it. So the captain's going to rate your performance, put some notes in, confirm how many hours you trained, and we're going to submit that to your underwriter, and they're going to say, stamp of approval, Jason's approved. He's now allowed to run his own boat per the navigation of the policy.
Right. Training wheels off.
Training can be 20 hours based on your resume. It can be 40 hours is pretty much the standard. Some carriers, if you're making a big jump, they'll go 100, 150 hours.
Yeah, I've actually heard a couple of people we request is like, you have to hire a captain for a year to live with you. Of course, no one can really afford that, right? So trying to find that, common ground where, you need training on your vessel, right? And I've heard that being more proactive about it versus waiting for them to come back with that, right? And say, hey, here's my plan. I know this is a big ask. It goes back to that planning, but I'm going to get someone. This is the person I have lined up. the first 3 weeks are going to be us figuring out the boat together, right? You know, that's the plan. We sign off on my plan versus waiting for them to come back and ask questions.
That's right. And I can't stress enough the need to start getting out in front of that. If you're thinking about making a jump in size like that, go to your agent first, or call me, client or not. I'm going to give you the advice. And if you say, this is what I've done and this is what I want to do, how big can I look at? I'm going to give you some guardrails on the side to say, well, you're not going to get owner operational on anything above this with any of my 6 direct carriers, maybe London. But if we go to London, the cost is going to be X. So there are a lot of factors involved in that. And if you do that prep up front, and if you came to me and said, man, here's my resume, or here's my link to my resume, can you check that out and give me some guidance on what I could look into getting into more easily? That solved a lot of heartache that we've seen in the past year or two. As these guidelines have gotten harder, the boat brokers are not necessarily telling the client, oh, you can't get in that 55. No, it's yes, we can get you in that 55. And then it lands in my lap a week before closing, and I try to make, a silk purse out of salesy. Right.
Let's get back to a couple of questions from the audience.
Yes.
One is here. It's interesting that Power Squadron may give credit. Does the training through the Salty Dogs count? And I would imagine some of the training programs that the Salty Dog organization, I'm not 100% familiar with all of them, but generally speaking, I would think if they're accredited or some sort of sign off, right?
Yes.
General training seminars like this one likely don't really have a huge impact, but if there's some sort of component to a qualified instructor signing off on something, then that's likely to,
right,
help paint that picture of your risk, right?
Well, and what I would say is that while most of the carrier systems, when they ask about training, they're going to say, has the insured had a safety course? Well, the answer there, if you've done some Salty Dogs training, is yes. So we can legitimately answer that with a yes. Some carrier systems are rigged to only give Power Squadron, Coast Guard Auxiliary, or other approved state boating course as a credit. Right. So in that instance, if someone came to me and said, I've done a lot of work with the Salty Dogs, and I would say, all right, let's see a curriculum. Let's see what you've done. Put it on paper, share it with me, even if it's an email from the Salty Dogs team that put the training together, to say, hey, this is what we did. We hosted this, we had this many attendees, we did X, Y, and Z over the course of X many hours or days, and we'll send that in and ask the underwriter for a credit. Right. Even though it's not Power Squadron or Coast Guard, if the curriculum fits, it's a safety course, you should get credit for it. Yes.
Yeah, even the NASBA certification is now standard for the next generation, right? I'm old enough where I didn't have to take it, but I took it. I put it on my resume and sent it to my Allstate, and they gave me a 6% discount for all of our vessels at the lake house. So I mean, it was worth an hour and a half just to get the small piece of paper for the online course. So, I mean, it can make a difference, right? And again, I think generally speaking, you're trying to tell the story of are you a risk or not? And generally, if you're seeking out training opportunities to get better, you tend to be viewed as less of a risk, right?
That's exactly right. I couldn't agree with that anymore.
Let's get to a couple more questions here. If they're insuring the boat, do underwriters take maintenance and use logs as historical evidence of care of previous vessels? So this kind of gets to, I know when talking to some of the underwriters, they're looking for someone like ex-Navy, right? That's been very trained to take care of stuff, right? That plays into their mindset at least, but will they accept maintenance and other logs from the vessels?
No. That's not an underwriting. I won't say that it's not a concern, Jason, but I will say that is not anything that they would ask for. I've never, ever been asked that from any underwriter.
But what if you proactively submitted it? Would it help you? I suspect the answer is no, right?
Nope. Nah. They want to see the survey. They want to see the survey, and they can read a survey and they can very clearly tell if a boat is suffering from deferred maintenance or not. Very quickly.
Right. Well, I guess that's kind of the point, right? The survey is the history of the vessel. then the sailing resume is your
The
actual
history of the
operational
person.
strengths, right?
That's
So those
exactly
together
right.
gives a pretty clear picture of what's going on.
100%. 100%.
Here's another question. How much weight does my U.S. Coast Guard master license afford me?
It gets a good credit. Again, it comes into play in a couple different ways, and I'm going to dial back one quick second to the Power Squadron / Coast Guard / Salty Dog credit. The average amount on that credit is about 5%. That's typically what I see when I see quotes come through that actually show what credits were applied. A safety credit is on average about 5%. Now, to this direct question, the captain's license is usually double that. So with one particular carrier I'm looking at, for example, Power Squadron course will get you 5%. An active captain's license will get you 10%. So that's a pretty decent credit.
And I also know, like, to keep your captain's license active, you have to have
Keep them
recency.
active.
It's no joke recency, right? You're talking about 180 days. I think Alex and I were talking about that before we jumped on the call. 4 hours equals 1 day, 24 hours equals 1 day, right? So it's not a easy thing to go do on the weekend.
But an inactive captain's license does not garner the extra credit. It'll get the same credit as a Coast Guard course. So just be mindful of that.
So the key is there to keep it active, right?
That's right. That's right. It pays to keep it active. So that's on the rating side, the benefit of the captain's license for the rating side of this equation. Yes, it will affect your premium in a positive way for you. It also comes in handy, although it is by no means the golden ticket when you are making jumps in size or big jumps in value. It is awesome for the underwriter to know that you've taken the time to get your captain's license. What that shows them is commitment. But until it's combined with a resume to show that it's been utilized in some fashion.
It's like owning a boat that sits at the mooring all year long, right?
That's right. That's right. So you got to keep that resume updated, even with your captain's license. It may help push you over the edge into a larger boat than someone without. Let's put it that way.
I would say, just if you're maintaining your captain's license, just maintain your resume, right? At least the log books, because at some point you got to renew that thing and show month by month what your days on the water.
That's right.
Right. And you actually have to get vessel owners to sign. So there's a lot of record keeping requirements from the Coast Guard.
Yep.
Here's another question from Patrick. Do charter companies keep records that you can check on when researching experience and vessel size? I can answer that from some of my experience that, of course, there's a contract in place with the captain. One of the services that we provide is we'll actually call the charter company and verify and check out that the charter actually happened. And of course, that the boat was returned in a good working condition. And you get that level of verification through the sailing resume that we provide as a service. That's kind of a premium verification service. But Adam, the question to you would be, to underwriters, or are you all calling up charter companies to verify their experience? I think it's pretty much self-reported is my general sense on that.
It's, if you tell them one thing, be sure you're telling them the truth.
Right.
Because they're not going to call your mama to ask you what boat you had. They're not going to call up the moorings to find out how many charters you had. They're going to look on that application when Jason says, I've owned X and Y, and I've chartered A, B, and C here, here, and here for this many weeks. They're going to take that on its face. They're going to trust that you're being honest with them. Now, if, for example, and I have seen this happen in the past, where applications get picked apart line by line and verified in the instance where an insured had a really bad claim. There was some gross negligence, death or heavy injury, major property damage, and I'm talking $1 million boat here, that kind of a thing. Somebody gets run over in the waterway, for example. They're going to go back to that application and they're going to say, all right, well, we let him run that 55 off of that 35 based on what he told us on paper, but was he really telling the truth? Because if they're staring at $1 million lawsuit, Jason, they're going to be looking at avenues to not pay.
Oh yeah, any little discrepancies. I mean, think of like healthcare insurance, right? It's like, oh, you're not covered, right? Because you didn't tell the absolute truth, right?
You know this. So I tell people, be thorough, don't over exaggerate, don't put anything down you can't back up. Because what if they did call the moorings and say, well, Captain Burns says he's chartered 3 boats, blah, 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 blah. If the moorings could be convinced to share that information with them, which I doubt they would, and if it didn't match up with what you said, they're going to come back and say, well, Jason, you've had this bad incident, but you materially misrepresented yourself on your application. We're voiding your coverage ab infinito, all the way back
to the very beginning, right?
To the very beginning, as if you never had coverage.
Yeah. Here's another
then you're
question.
screwed.
Here's another question. I have 30 plus years experience and 60,000 miles offshore. That's a couple trips around the world. So congratulations on that. But I don't have any of the recently created courses or certificates like ASA or even US Sailing. Will this particular individual already have the lowest rates? Or is there a reason to maybe even go do some ASA classes or US Sailing classes? Is it worth it for that type of individual that's already got demonstrated, worldwide sailing experience?
Right. Well, here again, we're going to be relying heavily on their resume, the years, the miles, where have you been, what was it on, etc. But again, if I ask the question, have you had any boating safety courses in the past? And you legitimately and honestly answer me, no, I've never had a formal course. Then as much as I believe you should get that credit, that 5% safety course credit,
you don't get to decide
that box.
Yeah.
Because again, while it's a minor misrepresentation, it is a misrepresentation, and we just can't do that. So my advice is, yeah, go take one for funsies. Hell, you could probably teach the people that are teaching that course, but just do it. Enjoy yourself. Go back to school.
Also,
Rodney Dangerfield.
I have some experience on the ASA side just because I've taken those classes. You can actually test out of them too. So you can get the credential by doing a test out. So you still pay your money to the school, but you don't actually have to sit there for 2 days to take the class if you don't want to. Right. Here's another question. I'm a full-time ASA instructor teaching both inland and Caribbean. Does that carry an effect? Is that any kind of additional discount because they're teaching? I would imagine it's mostly you have a lot more operational experience, right? Especially in different waters, but do they actually get credit as a teacher?
No, there wouldn't be any further credit beyond the basic safety course credit. Again, unless you had your captain's license, and you get a little bit more extra credit. But back to our 35 to 50 jump scenario, if you're a 35-foot owner, but you are an ASA instructor for the past 10 years, and you note that in your resume, that's really a big deal to the carriers. They say, well, if the ASA believes in Jason to teach these guys how to sail, then we can believe in it.
Yeah.
So I think, no, you're not going to see any extra crediting on the premium, but it would be helpful.
All right, we're going to move on to the next part. We'll have some follow-up for anyone who wants to stay on afterwards. We're going to talk about the Ugliest Sailing Resume Challenge. So you may have seen this when you signed up. We're actually extending the deadline to actually it's a little longer than a week, up to Halloween. Submit your resume just as is, pick it up, throw it in, send it to Sailing Resume at CharterRode. And we'll be reviewing those and choose the first inaugural winner of the Ugliest Sailing Resume Contest. And the winner will coordinate to send a brand new VHF, full DH or DSC and GPS. So if you're interested in doing that, do that. We'll actually take a look at a few with some time we have left here. Let's look at this resume. I just kind of want to get Adam your first impressions of it. We're not going to spend a lot of time on each one, but there's a lot of different ways to organize your resume. I want to kind of get your first impression on this. I've tried to remove all the identifying information, at least for this block, but what do you think here?
Sorry, I'm reading.
Yeah, no, I'm putting you on the spot. So here, this person's got organization by vessel, right? Which I know is important. They've got information there. They've got dates and times. They've got some information about the legs that they've taken as far as the nautical miles, right? Things like that. All looks like stuff that would be relevant and important, right?
Most certainly. Now, I want a clearer delineation between owned vessels and non-owned vessels. And so the entry number 1 is great. October 1, November 10, did some nautical miles. Here's where we stopped. Whose boat is it?
Yep. All
Down
right.
below,
We
I
want
see.
another one.
All right.
Kind of rapid fire
Ownership.
these, right?
There we go.
About 15
Ownership
seconds to
first.
get an impression on them. This one's actually showing approximate number of hours. I'm assuming
Yep.
that's operational hours, not engine
Yep.
hours, but
Yep. Yeah, now I'm really digging it because I'm seeing, okay, there's 3 vessels owned. I can see from when to when. That's easy. I like the hours on there. And then the deeper experience below, I like that. I like to see where they've gone. That's very important.
yeah, and then they've got some other stuff in here as well. But
Yep, yep.
let's move on to number 3. Now we're kind of getting more into like, here's a traditional resume,
Right.
You know, from like a
Right.
professional.
Yep.
And then they have a bunch of experience log, right?
Yep. And I'm watching the dates and the days and the locations, the size of vessel. Again, I can't tell unless I read the top of it, were these owned vessels? But that's the only thing extra I would want added into this that I'm looking at right now is owned or non-owned.
Okay. We're getting short on time. I'm going to skip. I'm actually going to pick on Alex agreed to this a little bit too. So what do you see here?
Little general information, offshore sailing, skipper, boat owner. So that would indicate to me that they'd own that Legend 37. Multiple races, 1990 to 2020. So it's not telling me exactly when he had it, but he's telling me that he raced it from 1990 to 2020. So that's strong. Offshore delivery, Transat crossing. I want to know on what and who owned it.
No, he's actually got that down here, right?
Okay.
So it's
All
in
right.
the boat's own section and racing background, training certifications.
But yeah, this is all the good general info that needs to be in a resume for me.
All right, I'm gonna have to contrast and I'll pick that on myself, right? So this is my sailing resume from obviously the product and service that we offer, where you're just logging your individual operational experience and automatically, so everyone's resume basically looks the same.
Right.
Critique this. I know you've seen it before, but give me some critique here.
Well, again, I have seen it, so it's a little easier for me to read. I think once an underwriter, for example, figured it out and knows how to look at it, or at least that summary page. But now you're getting into vessels. Click back to the sailboat page for me, Wade. Summary, and then hit sailboat tab.
Yeah, it's the same, right?
Right. Now hit the powerboat tab. So your experience, you got some noted there.
Yeah, in my conversations with underwriters, they're really most interested in this vessels tab, right? Because it gives them all the vessel information, whether you owned it or not, qualifying days, which again is the qualifying days for the U.S. Coast Guard, hours, nautical miles, all the gory details, and then based on the Coast Guard, the recency, right? How much of it has been recent, past 3, 5, or lifetime, right?
Yeah.
And then organizing your experience based on the vessel you have the most relevant experience on. When you're talking to charter companies, though, they're more interested, it turns out, in the extended trip section. Have you chartered a vessel before, right? Do you have any kind of experience aboard charter vessels?
Right.
And then obviously your credentials, the things that you've taken.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, so get your sailing resumes in, right? We'll take a look at them and crown a winner for the ugliest. And it's a badge of honor. And the whole purpose here is to help you learn how to meet the requirements that you're going to be asked to meet as you continue in your career. So the last thing I'll do here real quick, so we might get some questions. This is how easy it is to add a logbook entry. You click add entry, you pick the date, time, your trip. Something I don't see in a lot of resumes is your role, where you captain or crew for the experience. So being able to delineate between your role, the vessel, because being a captain of a vessel is a whole different responsibility than just crewing, right?
That question is asked, Jason, by all underwriters when they get a resume and it lists 3 or 4 boats. A captain's resume will list 3 or 4, 5 boats, but it doesn't specify the role they had aboard. And the underwriters always come back and say, "Hey, these boats look great, but what was her role aboard?
Right.
Was
So
she
just make sure
captain? Was
you're
she
listing
stew?"
that you were the skipper of the boat, right? If you weren't, let's clearly delineate your crew. But
Yep.
really just kind of filling out what you did, where you went. You can do multi-day trips, right? How many days you were, nights aboard, and then it just automatically aggregates into your resume. So every time you're at the dock, put the boat away, add your entry. This thing's updated in real time, and that's really kind of the point: is how do we make this super simple for everyone, so they're tracking the information they need to make your job easier when you're working with them as a potential client, right? All right, so if there's any other questions in the chat as we wrap up, if Adam, you have anything else you wanted to add, or Alex, I see you popping up on video. Do you
Yeah,
have any questions you wanted to ask?
I'll throw out a question. So if you're the skipper, and let's say you're doing your own resume, which is good, and then you've got crew that are maintaining their resume, and they need your sign off as the skipper because that's what those Coast Guard certs want. Is there a place where you can do that, where you could request
Yeah, so one of the
somebody?
verification types is crewmate, right? And then so you'd say crewmate is, I don't know, John Candy, and then the crewmate was the captain. So what this does is it sends via email, let's say, Alex, you were the captain, and then you would log into your, we call it a wallet, and then you would have a pending verification to review. And then you'd be able to certify that entry that you were the captain, they were your crew, and these were the details of that entry. Then it could also add it to your resume at the same time, and then you're verifying each other's experience. And that's something that we're showing here. We're digging a little bit into the weeds, but because we're using blockchain, we're able to verify those records and show on your resume what percent were verified through crewmate or charter or some other digital verification, and how much was self-reported. So we're putting a little more weight on using crewmate verification in particular, because someone else was on board. So you got 2 people lining up with the same story versus just me self-reporting it. And in the case of those Caribbean charters that you're doing, we'll actually call up the charter company and verify the details, so you get the absolute highest level of confidence on your blockchain-based resume.
What happens if, let's say, they're using this, your crew is using the service and you're not?
It's really easy to join, right?
Yeah. That
Okay.
solves that problem.
Right. And it's for Salty Dog members, you all get a free account. Identity verifications included in that. You have the first 25 logbook entries are part of your membership benefit. If you're participating in rallies, I think we give you 30 days logged, so you can log all of your experience on the actual rally included in your rally cost with the Salty Dogs. And then if you happen to be using it outside of those, it's $1 per day that you put on the blockchain. So it's really, really affordable as an investment into your own future for $1 every day you're out there, right?
Okay. Anybody else have any other questions?
Is there any preference between the terms skipper and master?
Not to me.
I would say either skipper or captain. But I don't think the insurance carriers really care. They're all synonyms for the same thing.
Well, the only problem that I run into with captain is, what is she a licensed captain? I mean, I'm going to get that. So I do think if you're a licensed captain, then that's appropriate to say I was captain of the vessel. I think if you are unlicensed, it's more appropriate to denote it as skipper or master. Skipper probably being the most salty general descriptor for that role. But, if you are the skipper, then you are the master of that vessel.
Right. What about watch captains?
That's good. It could be a little misleading. I mean, I know what a watch captain is, but not everybody's going to say, well, did he say he was a captain of that vessel? No, he said watch captain. What's the difference? Oh, you're going to run into problems there.
Yeah.
But I can see where, particularly for your sailors that are doing racing and using the resume to gain positions on race boats, where that would be important. Because if you're delineated as the watch captain, you know, there's extra trust in you to play that role. So I think it's worth noting.
Yeah. In that particular instance, right? But
right.
For something like coming up for the Salty Dogs Caribbean rally,
No.
probably not going to delineate. You're either crew or you're the skipper of the boat, right?
That's right.
I think that's about right. Okay.
All right. I think we're a little bit over on time, but Alex, if you
Well,
have anything else, I'll kick it back to you.
yeah, well, thank you very much, Jason and Adam. This is very informative. It's a very interesting product, and I think it has some great potential, especially when we think about the amount of time we're out there. And as we were talking, if you have Starlink, it's pretty easy to log in and update things.
Yeah.
Is there?
Well,
one last
Yeah, go
question. Is there an app by any chance on your phone that does this, or is it strictly web-based at this point?
Yeah, you can appify it on your phone pretty easily as part of the onboarding that sends you how-to articles to do all that stuff. So it's
Okay.
really super simple. It's meant to get in, get out. Not meant to be like your Instagram profile where you're spending all day in it, right? Sorting through the latest memes and GIFs.
Right. Okay. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I will stop the recording at this point.